WrestleMania, the biggest event of the biggest wrestling company in the world, the Super Bowl of pro wrestling, is this weekend. I'm not going to watch it. I also didn't watch it last year or the year before. In fact, despite having been a fan of pro wrestling and primarily of WWE and its former self, the WWF, since I was 7 years old, I haven't watched any WWE programming for nearly 2.5 years. I don't really miss it, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that WWE wrestling hadn't been very good for quite a while when I stopped watching. Some of you who aren't wrestling fans might not think of it this way, but pro wrestling is an art form like any other. It's theater. It's not Shakespeare, I'll be the first to admit that, but a wrestling match is a performance, and the best wrestling matches all tell a story. It's usually a very simple story, a story that wouldn't mean anything outside the context of pro wrestling. Wrestler A's favorite move is a submission hold applied to the leg, so they spend most of the match attacking Wrestler B's leg to weaken it. Or maybe Wrestler A is larger and more experienced than Wrestler B, which leads to overconfidence, which Wrestler B is able to turn to their own advantage. Or maybe Wrestler A has beaten Wrestler B before, but now Wrestler B has learned from their mistakes and tries a different strategy which allows them to come out on top this time. And of course, beyond the wrestling matches themselves, there are storylines that place the matches into a larger context. Two wrestlers or two groups of wrestlers might have been feuding with each other for months or even years. One wrestler might be on the cusp of winning a championship they've been chasing for a long time. Here's a popular one. The hero is struggling to overcome the machinations of the evil owner of the company. The thing is, the stories WWE was telling, both in the ring and outside of it, weren't very good. Wrestlers would switch from being babyfaces, good guys, to heels, bad guys, with little or no logic or explanation. Promising feuds between wrestlers would abruptly end with no definitive conclusion, while other feuds were continued long after most fans lost interest. Wrestlers who caught on with fans and began to rise in popularity would suddenly be booked to lose most of their matches or be shifted to a far less prominent position in the show. And through it all, there appeared to be very little in the way of long-term planning. Pro wrestling is often likened to soap opera, and I think that's a lazy comparison in many ways, but the two forms do share one fundamental quality. They're both serials. And as serials, they're at their best when they're able to create compelling setups and satisfying payoffs. Ideally, the biggest wrestling events, like WWE's quartet of major annual shows, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Royal Rumble, should feature matches that resolve storylines that have been built up for months. Heroes should win long sought-after victories. Villains should receive overdue comeuppances. Quests for championships or redemption or revenge should be completed. At various times in its history, WWE has been pretty good at that, sometimes for nice long stretches, but not for the last few years. Or at least not for the last few years before I stopped watching, which was a few years ago, though I haven't heard much to indicate that things are any better now. In fact, in a lot of ways, they seem even worse. But that's only the first reason I don't miss it. The second reason is more important and doesn't depend on my personal taste. So, yeah, more important. Some of you may have watched the recent segment about WWE on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. It was nice to see the issues addressed there get some attention, but the thing is, there was nothing in that segment that I haven't known for years. Most wrestling fans know this stuff. We know Vince McMahon is a bastard. Not just a guy who plays a bastard on TV, a bastard in real life. He's not a good person. He built the WWF into a national and later international powerhouse through predatory business practices. He's exploited his wrestlers for decades. He only instituted a wellness program, including drug testing and measures intended to reduce concussions, relatively recently after pressure from the media and the threat of federal regulation, and has freely admitted that the only reason he did so was public relations. And oh yeah, he's a Trump supporter. Judging by this photo, the whole family are Trump supporters. His wife, Linda, has served in Trump's cabinet as head of the Small Business Administration. She just announced she was stepping down last week. to run a pro-Trump super PAC. They're garbage. The McMahons are garbage. The Trump support was the last straw for me. Trump getting elected president sobered me up and made me realize a lot of things about my country and myself, and no longer being able to support WWE was not necessarily high on that list, but it was on the list. Shortly after the 2016 election, I canceled my WWE Network subscription, and I haven't watched any WWE programming since. I feel good about that. What I don't feel so good about is that it took so long, and a catastrophe like Trump getting elected, for me to do it. If I know the McMahons are seriously bad people, if I know the wrestlers are being exploited, if I know the company doesn't act in good faith, if I've known all of that since I was a teenager, and I have, why didn't I turn my back on this dishonorable and depraved company a long time ago? One big reason is that I'm selfish. I love pro wrestling. I love it so much, I was willing to place that love ahead of my guilt over supporting a company I knew to be morally repugnant. That's not an excuse, but it is a reason. And I dare say it's a reason a lot of you can probably relate to, whether you happen to be pro wrestling fans or not. When we're forced to confront the fact that something we love is problematic, that an artist whose work we enjoy has done something inexcusable, for example, there's often a reflex compelling us to just ignore whatever the problem is and go on enjoying the thing. We might know very clearly what the right thing to do is, but we have a hard time doing it because ignoring the problem is easier and it costs us nothing. We get to keep enjoying the thing we like as though nothing was wrong. That was me with WWE. That was me with a lot of things. That's still me with some things. The thing is, it feels like a personal choice. And it is. But we don't get to make those choices in a vacuum. The choices we make create ripples that spread out and touch the lives of other people. We affect each other in ways we never intended and often don't even realize. You, as an individual, deciding to ignore the dark side of WWE might not seem like it should matter to anyone but you, but WWE has only been allowed to survive and thrive because so many individuals have made that same decision. If enough of us are willing to turn a blind eye to abuse and corruption and exploitation, eventually we'll wind up with a society where those things are pervasive and accepted. I should mind my tenses. It won't do to say we will wind up with such a society when we're living in that society right now. So if I can wrench this video back toward the topic alluded to by the title, why am I a wrestling fan in the first place? Why do I love this stuff so much that I was willing to overlook the obvious and undeniable awfulness of WWE and the McMahons for so long? It goes back to what I said earlier about wrestling matches telling a story. And this is a personal thing. Not everyone gets it, which is fine. Not everyone gets the appeal of Star Trek or superhero comics or baseball or lots of other things I like. And if you do share my love of pro wrestling and you love it for the same reasons I do, I probably don't need to explain it to you. But to those of you who don't get it, whatever their particular story, most wrestling matches have the same basic plot structure. First, there's what's called the shine. The match begins and the babyface dominates the heel, outsmarting them, out-wrestling them, hopefully energizing the crowd. Then comes the heat. The heel takes control, usually by resorting to underhanded tactics. The idea of this is to build sympathy for the babyface and to rally the crowd behind them. Next, the false comeback. With the crowd behind them, the babyface breaks out of a hold or dodges a big move by the heel and retakes the advantage. But before that advantage can be pressed too far, the heel turns things around again and we go to the next stage, more heat, sometimes called big heat. This is where the heel is not just trying to punish the babyface, but actively trying to put the babyface down for good and win the match. The heel busts out their most devastating moves, but the babyface somehow survives and is able to turn things around again and make the second comeback, or the big comeback. Now it's the babyface's turn to pull out all the stops, hit the heel with their best stuff, and try to win the match. The The big comeback leads into the final stage of the match, the finish. And the finish can go either way. The babyface can continue to press their advantage, put the heel down for good, and win. The heel can thwart the comeback and win with a last-second reversal. The match could end in a draw of some kind. There are many possibilities. But if the wrestlers have done their jobs, one thing will always be true. No matter who does win the match, we, the audience, should want the babyface, the hero, the one who stands up to the bullies, the one who doesn't cheat, to win. Even at its best, pro wrestling doesn't necessarily stand up to deep critical analysis, but if you're looking for a deeper message, something positive wrestling is trying to impart to us by telling this story over and over again, I think that's it. We're supposed to want the hero to win. And ultimately, I decided to walk away from WWE and start looking for my pro wrestling fix elsewhere because I finally received that message. I remembered I'm not meant to cheer for the heels. Okay, so that right there, that was the finish. If this video were a wrestling match, the match would be over. This here, this is analogous to a post-match angle. Not technically part of the match, but still on the show and still important. I mentioned getting my pro wrestling fix somewhere else than WWE a second ago. I did not want to wrap things up without mentioning that two of the best alternatives to WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling and Ring of Honor, are also co-promoting a major show this weekend. In fact, it's arguably the biggest show ever for either company. In North America, anyway. New Japan's done bigger shows, but they've all been in Japan. It's called the G1 Supercard, and it takes place Saturday night in New York City at Madison Square Garden. This is a big deal. It's the first pro wrestling show at Madison Square Garden not promoted by the McMahons in almost 60 years. The Garden has been sold out for months, but the show is also being broadcast live on Ring of Honor's streaming service, Honor Club, and New Japan's streaming service, New Japan World. That's where I'm watching it. And it's available on demand from Fight TV and other pay-per-view providers. I'm not being paid to say this. I'm just a pro wrestling fan who is excited for this show. And if you're like me and you love wrestling, but you don't want to support WWE, you should think about checking out the G1 Supercard if you weren't already planning to, because it is shaping up to be one hell of an event. Okay, now I'm done. Show's over. Drive safe, everybody.